He didn't just turn off the television. He reached behind it, yanked the cord from the wall, and let it snap against the hardwood floor like something dead. The screen went black, mid-sentence right as the narrator was describing the final days of the Pacific Campaign in 1945. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was thick, intentional, deliberate. "We don't watch trash in this house," my wife's son said. And what hurt the most wasn't the cable lying there like a cut vein. It was my wife standing behind him, saying nothing. I had been sitting in my recliner, the brown leather one Martha and I bought back in '98, watching a documentary about World War II. I've always liked history, not the loud, flashy kind, the slow, steady kind that explains how people survive when everything around them is falling apart. The late afternoon light came through the living room windows at that perfect October angle, golden quiet, peaceful. The house felt still, calm. Then Ethan walked in. Heavy footsteps, purposeful, the kind of walk that announces authority before a word is spoken. Ethan Miller, 39 years old, self-proclaimed entrepreneur. I've yet to see a single stable business attached to that word. He didn't ask what I was watching, didn't greet me, didn't say hello. He just stood there for a moment watching the television as if it personally offended him. "Seriously," he muttered. I looked over the top of my glasses. "It's a documentary." He stepped forward. "It's depressing. Old men talking about old wars. We don't watch trash like this in this house. In this house." That phrase landed heavier than the insult. Before I could respond, he reached behind the television and ripped the cord from the outlet. It snapped loose with a sharp crack. The screen blinked black. Silence. My hand was still wrapped around the remote. I didn't move. 42 years as a certified public accountant taught me something valuable: control your face, control your voice, never react before you understand the numbers. But this wasn't about numbers. It was about territory. I turned my head slowly. "Excuse me." He tossed the cord onto the console table like he'd just taken out the trash. "We're trying to elevate the energy in this house. You sitting around watching war documentaries all day isn't exactly productive. I work part-time consulting. I handle my own investments. I manage the property, taxes, insurance, utilities, every bill that keeps that roof over our heads." But he said it like I was wasting space. I glanced past him. Martha stood in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, arms folded loosely, expression unreadable. "Martha," I asked gently. She avoided my eyes. "Ethan just thinks we should maybe focus on more positive programming." Positive programming. I nodded once. "Ethan," I said calmly, "this is my television." He smiled, not warmly. "It's our house." No, it wasn't. But I didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, I leaned forward slowly, picked up the severed cord, and ran my fingers along the plastic where it had cracked. It wasn't broken beyond repair, but the message was clear. He walked back toward the kitchen like he'd just rearranged furniture. "We'll talk about entertainment standards at dinner," he added over his shoulder. Entertainment standards. For 18 months, I had listened to small corrections like that. "Maybe you shouldn't drive at night. Maybe let me handle the mail. Maybe we should refinance while you still qualify." Small comments, small shifts. The kind you ignore because you don't want conflict. Because you don't want your wife stuck in the middle. Because after Martha's first husband died, she carried enough grief to last a lifetime. When we married 2 years ago, Ethan needed temporary space. Temporary turned into 18 months. 18 months of subtle takeovers. I sat there in the dark reflection of the blank television screen. The house suddenly felt different. Not louder. Just occupied. I stood up carefully, knees stiff, and walked upstairs to my bedroom, the only room that still felt untouched. Closed the door. Sat on the edge of the bed. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to replay everything. The mail Ethan insisted on bringing in. The way he'd started organizing my files. The way he once asked too casually where I kept my deed paperwork. The way he called me Daniel instead of Mr. Harper. It wasn't disrespect. It was positioning. A man doesn't rip a cord from a television over a documentary. He rips it to test whether you'll stand up. I looked at the framed photo on my nightstand. My first wife, Caroline. Gone 3 years now. She used to say, "Danny, you see patterns before anyone else. Don't ignore them." Patterns. I exhaled slowly. Downstairs, I could hear Ethan laughing in the kitchen. Martha's softer voice responding. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger is loud. This was quieter than that. This felt like an audit. At 8:30 that night after dinner, where Ethan explained to me what modern content consumption should look like, I went to my office, closed the door, turned on my computer, logged into my primary checking account. I hadn't looked closely in a few months. Why would I? I handle my finances carefully. But something inside me had shifted. The screen loaded, and the first unfamiliar transfer hit my eyes like cold water. Consulting fee, EM Holdings, $8,000. 2 months ago. My stomach didn't drop. It tightened. I scrolled. Another one, 6,000, 3,000, automatic transfers. Small enough to blend in, large enough to matter. Amy Holdings, Ethan Miller. The cord on the television wasn't about history. It was about control. And the moment he said, in this house, I realized something. This wasn't his first move. It was just the first one loud enough for me to hear. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe the way old houses do. Ducks ticking as they cooled the refrigerator, humming downstairs, a faint shift in the pipes when someone turned over in bed. Every sound felt magnified, measured. I've always trusted numbers more than feelings. Feelings can be manipulated. Numbers can't. At 5:12 a.m., I gave up on pretending rest was possible and went back into my office. The hallway carpet felt rough under my bare feet. The house was still quiet. Ethan and Martha wouldn't be up for another hour. I closed the office door softly and pulled up my account again. Consulting fee, EM Holdings. I clicked the transaction details. Authorized online, recurring monthly. The first transfer had happened 8 months ago. 8. I scrolled through statements from that period. At first glance, everything looked normal. Utilities, insurance, property taxes, groceries. But now that I was looking with intent, the pattern was obvious. The transfers weren't random. They came 2 days after my pension deposit each month. Like clockwork. My pulse stayed steady. 42 years reviewing financial discrepancies had trained my nervous system well. Panic is expensive. Calm is profitable. I downloaded the statements. All of them. Then I opened my credit report. I hadn't checked it in almost a year. No reason to. My debt was minimal, mortgage paid off in 2011, no outstanding loans. The report loaded. There it was. Home equity line of credit. Opened 4 months ago. $35,000 limit. Balance drawn $18,400. My chair creaked as I leaned back slowly. I hadn't opened a line of credit. I never would without a very specific reason. The application date caught my attention. 4 days after Ethan had helped me reorganize my file cabinet. I remembered that afternoon clearly. He'd insisted I was overcomplicating my paperwork, said I should digitize everything, said modern systems were more efficient. I remembered him holding my Social Security card. I remembered him asking about my signature style, said he admired how classic it looked. Classic. I opened the HELOC documentation. Electronic signature. My name. Not quite right. Close enough that most people wouldn't notice. But I signed my name the same way I have since 1983. This one had a slight upward hook at the end. I never hooked the end. The house felt smaller. Not physically. Psychologically. For 18 months, I tolerated small things. Ethan changing the Wi-Fi password for security reasons. Ethan suggesting I let him handle the property taxes. Ethan recommending I simplify my investment portfolio. He framed everything as help. And I let him. Because I loved my wife. Because after losing Caroline, loneliness had scared me more than pride. Because when Martha came into my life warm and grieving and hopeful, I told myself compromise was part of love. But compromise isn't surrender. And this wasn't help. This was positioning. At 6:02 a.m., I heard footsteps upstairs. Ethan. Heavy, confident, ownership in every step. I minimized the browser and shut my laptop quietly. The doorbell rang at 6:45, package delivery. Ethan called up the stairs, Daniel. I'll get it. Daniel. Not Dad. Not Sir. Not Mr. Harper. Just Daniel. I waited until I heard the front door close. Then I reopened the laptop and printed everything. Every transfer, every signature, every line of the HELOC agreement. Then I checked something else. My email. I rarely use the shared household desktop downstairs anymore. Ethan had insisted it was easier for everyone if certain accounts stayed logged in there for convenience. Convenience. I logged into the old iPad Caroline had bought me years ago. It still synced occasionally. There were emails I hadn't noticed. Subject line: long-term care planning, preliminary discussion. My stomach didn't drop this time. It solidified. The email thread was between Ethan and someone named Rachel Lawson, senior living consultant. Sunridge Assisted Living. Ethan's message: looking into options for a relative who's beginning to show mild cognitive decline. We want to transition him smoothly before things get worse. Relative. Cognitive decline. Transition him. I scrolled further. Rachel replied professionally. We would need documented evaluation from a physician plus proof of financial readiness and power of attorney authorization. Power of attorney. Attached was a PDF draft. My name: Daniel Harper. Agent Ethan Miller. My breath slowed. Deliberately. He wasn't just siphoning money. He was building a case. I kept reading. Ethan. My mother agrees it may be time to consider professional care. He's been forgetful lately. My mother agrees. Martha was copied on the thread. She hadn't replied. But she hadn't objected either. The room felt colder. Not dramatically. Just subtly. Like someone had opened a window in winter. I closed the email and sat back. It wasn't about the television. It was never about the television. It was about establishing a narrative. Old man watches depressing programs. Old man isn't productive. Old man forgets things. Old man shouldn't manage finances. Old man should transition. And once transitioned, house valued at $740,000. HELOC in place. Liquid assets accessible. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the printed papers. For the first time in 18 months, I didn't feel confused. I felt clear. When you audit a business, you don't accuse first. You gather. You verify. You protect assets. At 7:30 a.m., Ethan knocked on my office door. Hey, Daniel, you good? You seemed a little off last night. I looked up at him. He leaned casually against the frame like he owned it. I'm fine, I said evenly. Good, we just want what's best for you. Of course you do. I smiled slightly. I appreciate that. He nodded and walked away. At 8:10, Martha left for work. At 8:20, Ethan followed. By 8:22, I had my phone in my hand. And I called the one person who had known me longer than either of them. Michael Reynolds. My attorney. When he answered, his voice was still thick with mourning. Danny, you okay? I need to review some documents, I said calmly. And I need to do it today. There was a pause. Then his tone changed. Tell me what's going on. I glanced at the stack of printed evidence on my desk. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a husband trying to keep peace. I felt like an auditor building a case. I believe I said quietly, someone in my house has been moving numbers. And this time, I wasn't going to ignore the pattern. Michael Reynolds has been my attorney for nearly 20 years. We met when he was a young associate reviewing estate documents for one of my clients. I remember telling him back then that the best lawyers, like the best accountants, weren't dramatic. They were methodical. By 9:30 a.m., I was sitting across from him in his office downtown, a neat stack of printed statements resting between us. He didn't interrupt while I explained. He didn't react emotionally. He just adjusted his glasses and read, line by line, transaction by transaction. When he finished, he placed both palms flat on the desk. This isn't sloppy, he said quietly. No, it's deliberate. Yes. He slid the HELOC agreement closer. The signature is close enough that most institutions wouldn't flag it without a challenge. I never authorized it. I believe you. He leaned back in his chair. And this email thread long-term care planning, this is more concerning than the money. I nodded. He's building a capacity argument. Michael's jaw tightened. If someone convinces a physician you're declining and there's a drafted power of attorney ready, things can move fast. I'm not declining. I know that, he said, but perception can be engineered. Engineered. That word fit. For 18 months, Ethan had been engineering perception. The TV incident wasn't impulsive. It was narrative reinforcement. Old man watches depressing content. Old man reacts emotionally. Old man shouldn't manage assets. Michael tapped the page. First, we freeze everything, immediately. I'll draft a fraud alert and notify the bank's legal department. Second, you revoke any existing authorizations, in writing. I never granted one. That doesn't matter, we'll formalize your refusal. He folded his hands. Third, you document everything. Dates, conversations, behavioral changes. I've already started. He gave me a small nod of approval. I also recommend a voluntary cognitive evaluation, he added carefully. I met his eyes. To preempt any claim, he clarified, you control the narrative. It stung. Not because I doubted my mind, but because someone in my own house had made that suggestion necessary. By noon, we had filed fraud alerts with both the bank and credit agencies. The HELOC was frozen pending investigation. The recurring transfers were halted. But something still bothered me. This doesn't explain where the money went, I said. Michael looked at me thoughtfully. Do you want to know? Yes. Then we subpoena the receiving accounts. I nodded slowly. That would escalate things. There's a moment in every audit where you decide whether you're correcting a clerical error or uncovering criminal intent. This wasn't clerical. By 2:15 p.m., I was back home. The house felt strangely peaceful. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. The coffee maker still smelled faintly from the morning brew. The television remained dark, the cord still lying loosely behind the stand. I didn't plug it back in. Not yet. Instead, I went upstairs to the guest room Ethan used as his office. I didn't search aggressively. I observed. Desk surface clean. Laptop gone, he carried it daily. But on the bookshelf were 3 folders labeled. Expansion strategy. Liquidity plan. Asset transition. My hand paused over the last one. Asset transition. Inside were printed property assessments of my home. Recent ones. Market comparison sheets. Projected sale values. There was even a spreadsheet estimating post-care surplus after liquidation. Liquidation. The word didn't feel abstract anymore. It felt personal. At the bottom of one page in Ethan's handwriting were 2 words. After evaluation. I closed the folder slowly. The room felt airless. This wasn't just about siphoning funds. It was about displacement. Remove Daniel. Control assets. Liquidate property. I walked back downstairs carefully, the folders in my hand. I placed them on the dining table and sat. For the first time since Carolyn passed, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Naivety. I had believed compromise equaled harmony. I had believed patience equaled peace. But patience without boundaries invites strategy. At 5:47 p.m., Martha's car pulled into the driveway. Her steps inside were lighter than Ethan's. She entered the dining room and saw the folders immediately. Her face changed. Daniel, she said carefully, what's this? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply turned one folder toward her. Asset transition, I read aloud. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped pages. I didn't. You were copied on the emails. She swallowed. I thought he was just researching options. For me, tears welled in her eyes. He said you'd been forgetful. He said refinancing would help stabilize things. I have no mortgage. I know. She sat down slowly. He said it was temporary, that you'd be safer somewhere with supervision. Supervision. I leaned back in my chair. Martha, I said gently, did you believe I was declining? She hesitated. And in that hesitation, I felt something fracture. I don't know, she whispered. It wasn't betrayal in the dramatic sense. It was doubt. And doubt is enough. The front door opened at 6:02. Ethan's footsteps entered. He stopped when he saw us at the table. What's going on? I met his eyes calmly. Sit down. He didn't. Instead, his gaze fell to the folders. Recognition flashed. Then calculation. What are those doing out? I folded my hands neatly. I'm auditing, I said. He let out a short laugh. Auditing what? My life. Silence. Martha looked between us. Ethan's jaw tightened. You're overreacting. Am I? I slid the HELOC agreement across the table. He didn't touch it. The room felt tight now. Measured. Like the seconds before numbers balance or collapse. You opened a line of credit in my name, I said quietly. He didn't deny it immediately. Instead, he smiled slightly. You would have benefited from it. That was the moment. The mask slipped. Not anger, not apology, just entitlement. And I realized something with perfect clarity. He didn't think he was stealing. He thought he was reallocating. And the assisted living evaluation I asked evenly. He crossed his arms. We're thinking long-term. No, you're thinking ownership. Martha's voice broke. Ethan, he didn't look at her. He looked at me. You can't manage everything forever. I held his gaze. Watch me. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his expression. Not fear, but recalibration. And I knew then, the television cord had been a test. This was the real game. And he had just realized. I wasn't confused. I was calculating. Ethan didn't explode. That would have been easier. Explosions are obvious, they're loud. You can point to them and say, there, that's the problem. Instead, he went quiet. Not the confused kind of quiet, not the embarrassed kind, the assessing kind. He looked at the documents on the table, then at me, then at his mother. His posture shifted subtly, shoulders squared, chin lifted. You're misunderstanding everything, he said finally. I don't think I am, I replied calmly. You've always been cautious with money, he continued, as if explaining a complicated concept to a child. I was just helping optimize it. That HELOC was strategic. Rates are favorable right now. In my name, I said. You benefit from it. Without my authorization. He exhaled slowly. We talked about leveraging equity. We did not talk about forging my signature. That landed. Martha flinched at the word forging. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's dramatic. No, I said quietly. It's precise. He looked at his mother again, searching for alignment. She didn't give it. Her eyes stayed on the table. That was the first shift. Small, but significant. I have a call in the morning, Ethan said finally. We'll revisit this when you've calmed down. He turned and walked upstairs. Calm down. I almost smiled. The most dangerous assumption a person can make is mistaking silence for weakness. I gathered the folders carefully and carried them into my office. Locked the door. Sat down. Then I made 3 calls. The first was to the bank's fraud department confirming the freeze on the HELOC. They informed me the investigation would likely escalate to their internal legal unit. Good. The second was to a locksmith. I need all exterior locks replaced tomorrow, I said. Front, back, garage, side entry. There was a pause on the other end. Security issue. Yes. We can do 9 a.m. That works. The third call was harder. Martha, I said gently from my office doorway, I need you to take tomorrow off work. Her eyes looked hollow. Why? Because things are about to become very clear. She nodded slowly. That night, the house was quiet in a different way. Ethan stayed upstairs. I didn't hear his television. Didn't hear his usual pacing. I slept better than I had the night before. Not peacefully, but decisively. At 8:55 a.m., the locksmith arrived. Ethan was still in his room. Martha sat at the kitchen table, pale but composed. When the drilling began at the front door, Ethan came downstairs fast. What the hell is that? New locks, I said evenly. For what? For security. He looked at his mother. Did you know about this? She hesitated. Yes. That was the second shift. He turned back to me. You can't just change locks. I can, I said calmly. It's my house. The words settled between us. Not angry. Not shouted. Stated. Ethan laughed once. You're spiraling. No, I'm protecting assets. The locksmith moved methodically, removed deadbolts, installed reinforced plates, rekeyed every entry. I watched carefully. Ethan paced. At 10:12 a.m., the final lock clicked into place. I signed the invoice and placed all spare keys in my pocket. Ethan stood near the entryway, arms crossed. So what's the plan, he asked coldly. The plan, I said, is accountability. He stared at me. For 18 months, funds were transferred without authorization. A line of credit was opened under my name. Assisted living discussions were initiated without my consent. That was proactive planning. That was exploitation. His face hardened. You think I'm stealing from you? I didn't raise my voice. I think you've confused entitlement with permission. Silence. The bank called at 11:30. They had traced the HELOC withdrawals to an account registered under EM Holdings, Ethan's business entity. Funds had been transferred into a personal brokerage account. Speculative trades. High-risk options. Losses. Significant ones. I thanked the representative and hung up. Then I walked into the living room. Ethan and Martha both looked up. The bank confirmed the funds were diverted into your trading account, I said calmly. Martha's breath caught. Ethan's composure cracked for half a second. It was temporary leverage. You lost $17,000, I said. That's market fluctuation. That's fraud. He stepped forward, anger surfacing now. You wouldn't even notice the money if I hadn't pushed growth. I noticed, I replied evenly, eventually. He scoffed. You're acting like some victim. No, I said, I'm acting like the owner. That word changed the temperature in the room. Owner. Martha's eyes widened slightly. Ethan's lips pressed thin. You're overreacting, he repeated. No, I said quietly, I'm responding. At noon, my attorney emailed formal notice of fraud and intent to pursue restitution. I forwarded a copy to Ethan. He read it on his phone. His expression shifted from irritation to calculation to something sharper. You're involving lawyers, he asked. I already did. Martha looked between us, shaken. Daniel, maybe we can handle this privately. We tried private, I said gently. Private is how we got here. Ethan stepped closer to me now. Do you have any idea what this will do to Mom? Yes, I said. That's why I'm doing it now, not later. He laughed bitterly. You think you're some kind of hero? I think I'm done being passive. For a long moment, no one moved. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the living room again, same angle as yesterday, when he ripped the television cord from the wall. I walked over to the console, picked up the cable, plugged it back in. The screen lit up. History Channel. Volume low. Steady. Ethan stared at the television like it was an insult. It's not about the show, I said calmly. He met my eyes. I know. That's when I saw it. The realization. The shift in power. For 18 months, he had slowly repositioned himself. Controlled narrative. Controlled perception. Controlled small systems. But control depends on silence. And I was no longer silent. At 6:08 p.m., Ethan tried his key in the garage door. It didn't work. He stared at it. Then at me. And something in his expression hardened beyond irritation. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, I agreed. It's just begun. At 6:12 p.m., I heard his car engine again. Not leaving. Returning. The driveway gravel shifted under his tires with a sharp, deliberate crunch. I was still in the living room, seated in my recliner, the same chair from the day before the television, now calmly humming at low volume. Martha stood in the kitchen doorway, hands trembling around a dish towel she wasn't using. Ethan had left 20 minutes earlier without another word after discovering his key no longer worked. I assumed he was cooling off. I was wrong. The front door handle jerked hard. Once. Twice. Then a sharp pounding. Open the door. His voice carried through the wood like something feral and stripped of polish. I didn't rush. I muted the television, stood up slowly, walked to the door, and engaged the security chain before opening it 6 inches. Ethan's face was flushed anger replacing calculation now. What do you think you're doing, he demanded. Protecting my property, I replied evenly. You locked me out. I changed the locks. You can't just exile me. This isn't exile, I said calmly. It's consequence. Martha hovered behind me in the hallway. Ethan, she said shakily, please calm down. He ignored her. You think this makes you powerful, he spat. You're paranoid. You're unstable. I held his gaze. If I were unstable, I wouldn't have documentation. I slid the folder through the narrow opening. Bank reports. Fraud alert confirmations. The forensic summary from the HELOC review. He didn't take it. I don't need to read your paperwork. That's unfortunate, I said, because law enforcement already has. That wasn't entirely true yet, but the bank had flagged the account for investigation. And sometimes truth moves faster when fear precedes it. His breathing shifted. Less theatrical. More dangerous. You're going to regret this, he said quietly. I already regret trusting you, I answered. The air between us thickened. Neighbors' porch lights flickered on down the street as evening settled. Suburbia has a way of pretending nothing unusual is happening, even when voices rise. You have 10 minutes, I said calmly. I'll allow you to collect personal items from the garage. I'll bring them to the driveway. You're evicting me. I'm revoking access. He laughed once, sharp and hollow. You think Mom's choosing you? That landed. But I didn't flinch. This isn't about choice, I said. It's about legality. He stepped forward, suddenly pushing against the door. The chain held. Martha gasped. Don't I warned evenly? His eyes burned. You're making a mistake. No, I said. You did. He stepped back finally. For a moment, I thought he might lunge again. Instead, he turned and kicked the porch railing hard enough to rattle it. Then he stormed toward his car. I closed the door gently. Not slammed. Gently. Martha's voice trembled. Daniel, what's going to happen? I turned to her. That depends on whether he stops. She sank into the kitchen chair. I didn't know it was this bad. I know. Her eyes filled. I thought he was helping. I know. And I meant it. Because manipulation rarely looks malicious at first. It looks attentive, protective, involved. At 7:03 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. You have no idea what you just started. I didn't respond. At 8:41 p.m., headlights flashed across the living room walls again. He was back. This time there was no attempt at keys. Just immediate violence. The mailbox cracked first. A sharp metallic crunch. Then the sound of something shattering against the garage door. Spray paint hissed. Martha screamed from the kitchen. I didn't run outside. I didn't confront him. I did something far quieter. I pressed record. My phone captured everything through the front window. The red paint dripping down the garage. Thief. The irony was almost elegant. He hurled something at the porch light. Glass exploded outward. Neighbors' lights flicked on now for real. Voices murmured. Then tires screeched as he sped away. Martha was shaking. He's not thinking, she whispered. He is, I said calmly, just not strategically. I dialed 911. My voice remained steady as I described vandalism, financial exploitation, and escalating threats. 2 patrol cars arrived within 12 minutes. I showed them the video. I handed them printed documentation. I explained the HELOC. One officer, a woman about Ethan's age, looked at me carefully. Has he ever been violent before? No. Threatened you? Yes. She nodded. We'll file this immediately. Martha cried softly at the kitchen table while I signed the statement. By 10:05 p.m., a BOLO alert had been issued. Be on the lookout. It sounded dramatic, but this wasn't drama. It was procedure. When the police left, the house felt hollow, quieter than ever. The broken porch light left a dark shadow across the entryway. Martha sat across from me. I never imagined, she began. No one does, I said gently. She covered her face with her hands. He said you were slipping, that you were forgetting things, that you'd be safer somewhere monitored. I studied her carefully. Did you believe him? Her silence hurt more than a confession. I wasn't sure, she whispered. Uncertainty is fertile soil for manipulation. I understood that now. At 11:27 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. This is Officer Ramirez. We've located Mr. Miller. I exhaled slowly. He was apprehended approximately 4 blocks from your residence after a traffic stop. There were items in the vehicle consistent with vandalism. Spray cans. Tools. Intent. He's being charged with criminal mischief and financial exploitation pending further investigation. Martha's eyes widened. He's arrested, she whispered. I nodded slowly. Officer Ramirez continued. There will be a restraining order hearing within 48 hours. We recommend you attend. I will, I said. When I hung up, the house felt different again. Not peaceful. Not restored. But aligned. Martha looked at me through tears. I didn't think he was capable of this. I don't think he thought I was capable of stopping him, I replied quietly. The television still played softly in the background. War documentaries. Calm narration about survival. I sat back in my recliner. The same chair. The same house. But something fundamental had shifted. Yesterday, he ripped the cord from the wall to test me. Tonight, he learned something. The door he tried to control was never his. I didn't expect sleep that night. But exhaustion has its own mercy. Sometime after midnight, sitting upright in my recliner, with the television muted and the house dim, I drifted into a shallow, restless kind of sleep, the kind where your mind keeps watch even when your eyes close. At 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. I was awake before the second vibration. Martha stirred on the couch across from me. She hadn't gone upstairs. I don't think she wanted to be alone. The number was unfamiliar again. I answered. "This is Officer Ramirez. I wanted to update you before morning." My body remained still, my voice steady. "Go ahead." "Mr. Miller was processed and is currently being held. However, there's something you should know." A pause. "He was agitated, repeatedly stated you fabricated the financial allegations, claimed you were mentally unstable and dangerous." "Of course he did." "He also attempted to contact your wife multiple times from holding." I glanced at Martha. Her eyes were open now, watching me. "Thank you for letting me know," I said quietly. "There will be a temporary restraining order placed automatically due to the vandalism and documented financial exploitation concerns. He will not be permitted within 500 feet of the residence pending hearing." "I understand." When I ended the call, Martha spoke in a fragile whisper. "He thinks you're unstable." "He needs that narrative," I replied calmly. "Without it, he has nothing." She swallowed hard. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the house already felt different. Not tense. Clarified. By 9 a.m., my attorney called. "The bank's legal division has completed a preliminary review," Michael said. "They're classifying the HELOC as fraudulent activity." That was quick. "They have incentive. It protects them as well." He paused. "There's more." I leaned back in my chair. "They traced the transferred funds into speculative trading accounts. Significant losses, margin exposure. It appears Mr. Miller was attempting to recover losses by increasing leverage. A gambling spiral. That explained the urgency. The escalation. The risk. "Does it reach criminal threshold?" I asked. "Yes." I closed my eyes briefly. Not out of grief, out of acceptance. There's a moment when you realize someone you hoped was misguided is instead reckless. And reckless people don't stop at suggestion. They stop at impact. Around noon, Martha's phone buzzed. She stared at it for a long time before answering. I could hear Ethan's voice faintly through the speaker, rapid, defensive, emotional. "Mom, he's twisting everything." Martha's eyes darted toward me. "He's exaggerating." Her hand shook. "You said he was declining," she whispered into the phone. A pause. "I said we needed to protect assets." "Protect assets?" I saw the recognition settle into her posture. "He trusted you," she said softly. His voice sharpened, defensive. "He's old. He doesn't understand risk." I didn't interrupt. Didn't react. After a moment, Martha ended the call without saying goodbye. She sat motionless. Then she began to cry. Not loud. Not hysterical. Just quiet realization. "I thought I was helping him," she said through tears. "I thought you were just stubborn about money." "I am stubborn," I admitted gently. "But not incompetent." She covered her face. "I let him convince me you were slipping." "That's how it starts," I said softly. "Manipulation rarely begins with lies. It begins with doubt." By late afternoon, the formal restraining order was delivered. An officer knocked at the door and handed me the paperwork in a sealed envelope. 500 feet. No contact. No financial access. The legal system had drawn a boundary Ethan could not cross. For the first time in months, I felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph. Not relief. Stability. That evening, something unexpected happened. Martha approached me while I was in the office reviewing additional bank documentation. "Daniel," she said quietly. I looked up. She stood straighter now. More certain. "I'm filing for separation." I studied her carefully. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I married you because I trusted your steadiness. I let him convince me steadiness was weakness." Her eyes were clear now. "He's been volatile for years. I just kept reframing it as ambition. Ambition without restraint becomes entitlement. Entitlement without consequence becomes exploitation." "I won't live like that," she said. I believed her. The following morning, we attended the temporary hearing. Ethan stood on the opposite side of the courtroom wearing a pressed shirt and a carefully neutral expression. He looked composed, polished, but his eyes moved too quickly. The judge reviewed the documentation carefully. Financial records. Video evidence of vandalism. Email correspondence referencing assisted living. Mr. Harper, the judge, asked me directly, "Have you undergone any recent cognitive evaluation?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied calmly. Michael had arranged one the previous day. Voluntary. Comprehensive. I handed the report forward. The judge skimmed it. Cognitive function above average for age. A subtle shift rippled across the room. Narrative dismantled. Ethan's composure fractured just slightly. The restraining order was extended pending full financial investigation. Court adjourned. As we stepped outside, Ethan's mask slipped. "This isn't over," he hissed under his breath. I looked at him without anger. "You're right," I said calmly. "It's not." But not in the way he meant. That afternoon, something else collapsed. Not legally. Emotionally. Martha received another call. Ethan was released on bond. Within hours, he showed up at her workplace parking lot, shouting, blaming, accusing her of betrayal. Security escorted him away. When she called me, her voice shook differently this time. Not from confusion, from clarity. "He's not protecting me," she whispered. "No," I said gently. "He's protecting himself." That night, as I sat in my recliner again, the television quietly narrating battles long past, I understood something important. The collapse wasn't his arrest. It wasn't the restraining order. It wasn't the financial exposure. The collapse was the illusion. The illusion that manipulation equals strength. The illusion that silence equals consent. The illusion that age equals vulnerability. He had built his position slowly, but it unraveled quickly once examined. And I realized something else. The most dangerous moment in any conflict isn't when someone attacks you. It's when they believe you won't respond. And Ethan had miscalculated one thing. He thought I was tired. He thought I was fading. He thought I was afraid of confrontation. He never considered that I was patient. And patience, when focused, becomes precision. 4 months later, the house felt like itself again. Not because the walls had changed, not because the locks were new, but because the tension that had once moved quietly through the rooms, like a draft you can't quite locate, was gone. The garage had been repainted, the mailbox replaced, the porch light repaired. If you drove past from the street, you would never know what had happened here. But I would. And that mattered. The financial investigation concluded in early February. The bank classified the HELOC as fraud. Charges were filed formally. Ethan accepted a plea deal, restitution, probation, mandatory financial counseling. He never went to trial. He didn't want the emails read aloud in a courtroom. He didn't want the phrase cognitive decline narrative entered into public record. He didn't want the numbers displayed on a screen. For someone who liked control, transparency was unbearable. Martha finalized the separation shortly after. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't theatrical. It was tired. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had first laid out the folders labeled asset transition, and signed papers quietly. "I don't know how I missed it," she said once, staring at the wood grain. "You wanted to believe him," I answered gently. "I wanted to believe you were safe." I said, "I just wasn't alert." That was my part in it. Trust is not weakness, but trust without verification is risk. After she moved into a small apartment across town, the house felt larger, echoing at first, but gradually steady. On Wednesday mornings, I began hosting something new. It started small, 3 people around my dining table. A retired teacher whose grandson had convinced her to co-sign loans she didn't understand. A widower whose daughter had borrowed from his retirement account. A former mechanic who'd nearly signed over power of attorney after a questionable diagnosis. Word spread. We didn't call it therapy. We called it the Wednesday audit. Coffee. Printed statements. Calm conversation. No shame. Just clarity. The first time I told my story out loud, my voice didn't tremble. It didn't carry anger. It carried recognition. It started with a television cord, I told them, but it was never about the television. They nodded. Because they understood. Small acts are rarely small. They are signals. At home, I kept the cord Ethan had ripped from the wall. Not as a trophy. Not as a reminder of betrayal. But as a symbol of interruption. The moment silence broke. Some evenings I sit in my recliner, the same leather chair worn smooth from decades of living, and I let the television play quietly. History documentaries, old westerns, even the news sometimes. No one walks into Unplugged. No one comments on productive content. The house breathes differently now, not because conflict never existed, but because boundaries do. A few weeks ago, Martha stopped by. She stood on the porch 500 feet well behind her son's legal boundary and handed me a casserole dish. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not for loving her son, but for doubting me." "I know," I replied. "We don't speak often, but when we do, it's honest. That's enough." As for Ethan, I don't know where his business stands. I don't follow the markets he once chased so recklessly. I don't check his name in public records. Accountability will do what it does. I don't need to supervise it. Sometimes people ask if I feel vindicated. I don't. Vindication implies victory. This wasn't a victory. It was a correction, a recalibration. There's something you learn when you audit finances for 40 years. Discrepancies rarely begin with massive theft. They begin with rounding errors, with small assumptions, with overlooked details. Left alone, they compound. Addressed early, they resolve. My life was no different. I ignored the rounding errors, the subtle comments, the shifting paperwork, the redefined language. In this house, that phrase still echoes sometimes. But now when I hear it in memory, it lands differently. Yes, in this house, in this life, in this mind, I remain the owner. If you're listening to this and something small in your world feels slightly off, if someone is redefining your reality, one conversation at a time, pause. Not to react, but to review. Not to accuse, but to audit. Silence can be generous, but silence can also be permission. I chose to interrupt mine, and it changed everything. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt your steadiness mistaken for weakness or your patience mistaken for surrender, I'd like to hear from you. Where are you listening from tonight? What small signal have you ignored that might deserve a second look? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Your story may help someone else recognize their own turning point. We have many more stories like this. Stories about dignity, boundaries, and the quiet strength that doesn't shout, but still stands firm. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Let's keep auditing what matters together.